Late Night Conversations, Monday to Thursday, 10 p.m. till midnight. Social Conversations.
Let's welcome our next A-team guest, Professor Willie Chinyamurindi, who's not a stranger to the A-team. He's a professor in the Department of Business Management at the University of Forte. We are talking about why it is so important for young scientists to be considered as, the apple of our eyes in Africa. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Good evening.
Good evening, Patricia, and it's always wonderful to talk to you.
Well, the South African Young Academy of Science is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Talk to us about the inception of the South African Young Academy of Science.
Thanks, Patricia. In the year 2011, the then Minister of Science and Technology, Minister Derek Hanekom, was part of an instrumental, adventurous project, really, that sought to address what we often refer to as the pipeline challenge, where we find that we don't have as much contribution from the next generation of young scientists. By creating a community of scholars, which then became known as the South African Young Academy of Science, which basically is a constituent of young people. And when I say young, I'm talking mostly, we mostly operate within the institutions of higher learning, the research centers, with an aim really to contribute towards solutions at a national, global, African level related to addressing issues of science. Now, when we talk about science, often the temptation is to reduce science to the way, those guys who work in the labs and so forth. But we're also talking about social scientists to this particular special cohort of young people who really are the future of our scientific community, not only in South Africa, but on the continent and in the world.
Well, talking about these young social scientists and scientists at large, it seems that those in the South African Young Academy of Science have been really doing great things. I mean, mention some of the young people who have created such great scientific works.
Yes, Patricia, and for myself as one of the co-chairs with my colleague, Dr. Manjoro from the University of Venda, we and the EXCO, we are just there to create a platform where young people flourish and where young people show these great scientific capabilities and talent that they have. We have launched a scientific advisory group on emergencies, which we call SAGE, which is really trying to look at promoting aspects related to the environment. I mean, if we are to enjoy the future, we must have a world to live in. We must have a world that is together, a world that is safe for everybody. So the Scientific Advisory Group on Emergencies is exactly there to try and push the agenda around not just issues related to environmental management. Recently, that SAGE committee was even reflecting on the recent challenges that we had in the country, which led to the looting. We also have science and policy engagement, where we have platforms at a national level with influential key stakeholders in trying to address the future of science. So it's a wide array and a wide repertoire of skills that we have, all contributing to the competitive strength of South Africa's scientific community through these young people.
Looking at the article, I mean, you mentioned one young person who has created a Frugal Biodesign. Talk to us about this multi-award winning design.
Well, I know he's listening through. I wish he could speak about it himself, because I'm from the social science perspective, and one of our members, really, Dr. Sudesh Sivarasu from the University of Cape Town, it's part of this big project that he's been working on, which is really a unique medical device which is used for within the practice of his particular focus area and the work that he does. And what we like about what some of our young people are doing is how their innovations are not just innovations that end at the University of Cape Town, but they are innovations that are being recognized on the continent and across the entire length of the continent. I could talk to you even just to balance it a little bit. We have one of our members, Professor Puleng Segalo, who has been part and parcel of this important conversation that we should be having around survival and resistance, particularly looking at South African women. I mean, this is Women's Month, and part of her work really has been to try and give voice, particularly to marginalized, often not given voice, particularly as a sample in Black women who need forums where they can also vent out and also be heard, particularly concerning some of their day-to-day struggles. So it's a wide repertoire, and like I said, Patricia, our job is made easy by just creating an environment through our parent company, ASAF, and all the support advisory that we get to just let these young people show their talent.
I wish that these young people who are listening, the professors that you have mentioned, could just call in and share their experience and their talent. It's something that is really encouraging. The South African Young Academy of Science celebrating its 10th anniversary. We are talking to Professor Willie Chinyamurindi, who is a professor in the Department of Business Management at the University of Fort Hare. Call in on 011 714 2006, or you can WhatsApp on 0614 104 107. SMSs go to 41391. Prof, I always ask myself, how can we make science cool? And especially for those in high school, yeah? Because when you keep telling children how important STEM subjects are, you make it sound like an even more difficult thing. Why don't you just call out the subject by name? So how can we make it cool again?
Well, we must also address some of the challenges on the ground. I mean, I stay in East London, and we've got communities around us in Tansane and even Nompumelelo, just down the road from where I stay. We must ask ourselves questions that, are these schools having enough resources to be able to, if you like, preach the gospel of science? Particularly not just physical resources like your equipment and so forth. We're talking about expertise. Do they have teachers who are nurturing and encouraging, and providing sufficient guidance to these young people so that they are aware of the range of choices around them? Sometimes in a not so bad way, Patricia. In my field, we call it the play. When kids play and mimic certain roles that they see on television and so forth, it's part of them learning about careers. But at a larger platform, we need ways of encouraging such play events to be happening across the country, where young people can meet and be exposed to all these cool young people that we're talking about, and also see the possibility of science. I think the challenge we have often is there's a lot of impossibility around science. I mean, you just have to look at currently what's happening, particularly with the vaccine hesitancy. Part and parcel of all of this is the so-called lack of trust amongst different stakeholders. And if you like, science has actually been seen as this bad space to play in, whereas every other day we owe it to science to be able to enjoy certain privileges and benefits that we have. So I think to make it cool, let's start rethinking about the current structures that we have, to ask ourselves questions like, are they conducive in telling this gospel of science that we ought to be telling and encouraging everybody to do so, particularly our interest as well. and through the work that we do in the townships and also the rural communities where we don't see a lot of emphasis being given, and some of our members are playing into these areas to make science cool, as you say.
Well, let's make science cool and, let's make sure that the approach is holistic because, I think of some of the schools in the lower quintiles, Prof, and I think of how, they don't have the same advantage as schools that are in the higher quintiles. They don't have access to science labs. They don't have access to the technology that other schools might have access to. I know how fun it was to go into a lab and, actually see a Bunsen burner. I don't know if you guys still use those, and the test tubes and, look through a magnifying glass and do certain experiments. It was more fun than actually sitting in front of, in the class and looking at the teacher in front and, going through all these terminologies. But some of these children don't have this access. So what can be done to ensure that there's equality in our education system when it comes to science?
Well, we must applaud some of the efforts on the ground. And I think these are efforts. I mean, when you look at other parts of the continent, we're doing quite well in trying to even the playing field, as to say. Looking at the efforts that have been taken a few weeks ago, we're celebrating National Science Week. You could see that there are efforts on the ground. I think this is where platforms like ours are also important, where we as young scientists also take it upon us, as young scientists, to make sure that we are also trying to think of the future. How sustainable are we going to be in also addressing the challenges that we have? I'll give you an example, Patricia. In the Western Cape, we've got two of our members, Professor Fanelwa Ajay and Dr. Natasha Ross, who are at the University of the Western Cape, who have gone out and actually started an NPO that looks at bringing science into the townships in Cape Town, Khayelitsha, and so forth. And those are the types of efforts that we need to think about also as young scientists and also as a society, that our efforts should not just be in getting all these accolades and presenting papers at international conferences and flying all over the world, whereas we've got a very rich ground in which we can also show our expertise, but also help to develop the next person. Finally, a crucial thing that we also need to embrace, which is really key, is the transformative nature of our education system. I think we need to be encouraging more and more science subjects being taken seriously. I often cringe, Patricia, when registration comes at the start of the year, when you look at students and the choices that they've made in terms of the subjects, whereas you could actually discover that most of these choices were not made based on some sound judgment. It was really based on, hunch, and there's no proper guidance. So we need more guidance services in the schools, particularly to also offer balance, to say science is not just about the test tubes and the Bunsen burners, as you say. It's also about social science. So, for instance, the aspect of social distancing, no matter how much we've been trying to get people to put on masks, social scientists also can play a part in the social engineering that can happen in society, trying to change, people to encourage positive, healthy habits. And we need those types of scientists that also study the mind, that study social behaviors. And there's room for everybody. And that's the type of message that we need to make to everybody, that it's no longer a preserve of a certain elite, but there's room for everybody on the science bandwagon.
So, when you're talking about the social sciences, I'm taken to COVID-19. I mean, the devastation that this pandemic has caused worldwide is just unthinkable. In such a short space of time, our lives have been turned upside down. And I know that you, as the South African Young Academy of Science, have been taking strides to ensure that, there are solutions which can address this devastation. Tell us more about them, please.
Yes, we've done a number of events in the last last year, actually. of noteworthy, we're working on a book with young scientists in South Africa, but also young scientists on the African continent, where we've asked the question to these young scientists: how do you imagine the new world post-COVID-19, and what lessons can we learn from COVID-19? Now, Patricia, when this the pandemic started, it caused a lot of change to our day-to-day routine. And part and parcel of what we want is, if we are to be in the same scenario again in a couple of years, we want to be slightly wiser to be able to respond to some of the challenges that are meted out by, the current reality of the pandemic, like what we have. We've also done events where we've contributed towards posters and information dissemination platforms where we've circulated posters across the continent. Now, this was just a project that just started with us in South Africa, where we try to embrace all the languages that we have to just awaken and make people aware of what the pandemic is. And then we started receiving emails from other African countries to say, we like your poster. Can we get permission to be able to translate it in our language, to be able to reach our communities as well? We've had even another information dissemination strategy where we've done a poster where we were looking at the coronavirus vaccine myths versus facts poster, which is quite interesting now because of the current conversations we're having about the vaccine. But what we have responded to is by looking at our local areas. Young scientists are being invited to speak to communities about their experiences of working, some of them on the front line in response to the pandemic. What we are just saying to the young scientist community is that we mustn't fold our arms and just watch things go by. We want our members to be busy, contributing to the betterment of society, albeit the difficult conditions that we're living under.
They are quite difficult. I mean, one of the conditions for young scientists as well is that of funding and financial and non-financial needs of young scientists. How can those be prioritized?
Okay, so the background to this, Patricia, is the international war for talent. So we could have somebody from, for argument's sake, from Stellenbosch or from Joburg, who's gone to one of our universities, done well and worked hard, and then is failing to find opportunity to be able to work in the system. And then the international war for talent picks up. And this is particularly happening on the global front, where young scientists are being lured into going overseas to go and work and leave the continent and the country. And that's good because of the needed experience. But at the same time, it also robs us of talent. And part and parcel of the dynamics are the constraints that we face, the period of austerity we are in, where you find that there's been a lot of cutbacks. And sometimes when cutbacks happen, the research budget is cut, and so a lot of young scientists don't have expression there. And the sad one for me is, there are two. The first is young scientists are looking for some form of work-life balance, work-life interface to their existence and their being. And sometimes it doesn't happen because they often have to work long hours to try and prove themselves into a system. Sometimes the system has people who are, have been there for a long time and will do anything to keep young scientists out in the name of holding on to their position. But also there's the challenge around mental well-being, where our young scientists are often affected by the challenge and the constraints of trying to reach the apex. While reaching the apex, I know of one conversation I've had. Somebody says, I'm beginning to even question whether it was worth it, because I've worked hard, spent most of my time in a lab working hard to try and arrive to this solution, and I don't get as much recognition as I should. I don't feel accomplished. I don't feel satisfied. And so what we are encouraging also our young people is to know that it's fine to also reach out and also express some of these challenges around this very tough system that we're working in.
Most definitely. Prof, I really appreciate the conversation that we have had, because it has shed light on the importance of sciences and scientists in South Africa and across the globe. I'm hoping that a lot of people are enticed to get into the sciences after this conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Patricia, and I hope next time we can have some of these young voices that we were talking about on the show, and they can also speak to their expertise as well. But thanks a lot. We appreciate this opportunity.
Most definitely. A-teamers, it's 11 o'clock on the dot. Let's go to the news with Greg Hoos. Good evening, Greg.